We begin right now. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, this moment. A room that was supposed to hold order was thrown into chaos. Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to drown Jasmine Crockett in noise, insults, and pure disruption. But Crockett didn't shout back. She stayed calm. She reached for something stronger than anger, the law itself. And then, when a Supreme Court justice moved to cover for Greene, Crockett put down a single piece of truth that no one in that chamber could escape. This story isn't about politics as usual. It's about what happens when arrogance meets accountability, when a voice built on chaos collides with a voice built on justice. Greene thought she could play the part of the bully. Alito thought his robe made him untouchable. What they both learned before the entire country is that one law and one truth can silence even the loudest. And here's where you come in. We're building this moment together, not as spectators, but as citizens who demand more. I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Let the people in Texas see who's standing with them. Let the voices in Georgia know who is paying attention. Because this isn't Crockett's fight alone. It's yours, it's mine, it's America's. So buckle in. Stay with me. Share this with one friend who still believes no one can challenge power. Let's go, because the story starts now. The hearing room was never meant to sound like this. What should have been a space for order, for measured voices and deliberate truth, cracked under the sound of chaos. Reporters sitting along the back row lowered their pens for a moment, not because they lost interest, but because they could hardly hear over the shouting. It wasn't a debate, it was a spectacle. At the center of it, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward, her microphone live, her voice turned sharp enough to slice through the entire chamber. "This woman," she snapped, pointing across the table toward Jasmine Crockett, "doesn't even deserve to be here. She parades around like she's some great lawyer, but she's a fraud. A fraud! Everything she touches is a disgrace." Gasps broke across the room. It wasn't the first time Greene had chosen insult over argument, but this was different. She wasn't just raising her voice, she was trying to drown the hearing itself. Staffers shifted uncomfortably. Members from both parties exchanged wary glances. Cameras from C-SPAN and every major network zoomed in closer. Crockett didn't move. For a long, stretching, 6 full beats by the clock on the wall, she sat completely still, her eyes fixed on Greene as though she was studying a child throwing a tantrum. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One woman thrashing against order, another sitting in absolute control. Greene mistook that silence for weakness. "Why don't you answer?" she barked again, her southern drawl thickened with rage. "Why don't you tell the people here where your money came from? Or are you scared? You call yourself a lawyer, prove it." The word "prove" hung in the air like a taunt at recess. Some in the gallery chuckled nervously, unable to believe that the floor of Congress had devolved into something that looked more like a playground fight than a constitutional hearing. Crockett still didn't reach for her mic. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her face unreadable, her hands folded on the table. She had seen this tactic before: the loudest voice, the wildest gesture, the attempt to control by sheer noise. But Crockett knew noise was no match for truth. Across the room, a correspondent whispered into his phone, "She's not answering, she's just staring." Greene looks furious. That fury only grew. Greene waved a stack of papers, printouts of blogs, half-sourced accusations, political gossip dressed up as evidence. "This is the record," she shouted. "This is what Jasmine Crockett doesn't want you to see. You hide behind your big words, your so-called degrees, but you're no better than a criminal hiding receipts." The word receipts sparked murmurs. Everyone in the chamber understood its weight: evidence, documentation, proof. Greene was playing with fire, because Crockett had built her reputation on producing receipts that silenced entire panels. The audience leaned forward. Was Greene really about to hand Crockett the exact weapon she thrived on? Still, no reply. That silence was strategy. Crockett wasn't letting Greene dictate the tempo. She was letting her run wild, letting her burn through every ounce of rage, until the room itself grew tired of it. Until even the cameras began to capture not the strength of Greene's attack, but the desperation behind it. Finally, Greene pushed her chair back, almost standing. "If you're so real, if you're so proud of your so-called law degree, then answer me. Why won't you? Is it because you know you can't?" The insult landed like a drumbeat. Some in the gallery booed softly, others covered their mouths. Every viewer at home could feel the temperature of the room rise. And then Jasmine Crockett moved. Not with a shout, not with a counterpunch. She simply reached forward, clicked her microphone on, and let the red light glow. The room hushed itself without her having to ask. Even Green's voice cut off mid-sentence, waiting for Crockett to finally break her silence. Crockett looked directly at her opponent. Her tone was calm, measured, steady as stone. "Congresswoman," she began slowly, "I don't answer noise. I answer law. And in this chamber, that is what will stand." The line was not loud, but it was seismic. Members shifted in their seats. Viewers at home tweeted furiously. Headlines were already being typed in newsrooms. Crockett breaks silence with one line. But she wasn't done. She leaned slightly closer, her eyes still locked on Green's. "You want to talk about money? About records? Then I suggest you bring something more than rumors and blog posts. Because when I bring receipts, they don't come from the internet. They come from banks, from courts, from the very laws you swore an oath to uphold." Gasps again. This was the pivot. Crockett had not only rejected Green's attack, she had turned the very word Green hurled at her receipts into a blade. The gallery came alive. Some whispered, some scribbled. On social feeds, the clip replayed instantly. Green yelling, Crockett still, and then that calm declaration about law and receipts. But Crockett stopped there. She didn't reveal the document yet. She didn't read the statute. That would come later. For now, she let the silence return, not as submission but as dominance. Green sat frozen, lips tight, as though realizing too late she had walked into a trap. Crockett clicked her mic off. The red light faded. And the room hung suspended in that pause, waiting, watching, knowing something had shifted. That was where part one ends. The calm before the storm. The exact second where Crockett's silence turns into anticipation, where every eye waits for what she will say next. And in that silence, the path opens directly into part two, where she begins not with anger, but with the cold, precise language of the law. The silence at the end of part one lingered, heavy enough to make every breath in the chamber feel louder than words. Crockett had switched off her microphone, but the echo of her last line, "I don't answer noise, I answer law," still hovered like smoke no one could clear. Then, slowly, she leaned forward again. The red light on her microphone glowed back to life, and in that glow, the room felt itself snap into focus. Reporters straightened. Members sat forward. Green gripped her stack of papers tighter, unsure of what was about to land. Crockett's voice was steady, measured, as though she was dictating to history rather than debating a colleague. "Congresswoman Green," she said, "you've demanded proof, you've demanded clarity. So let's begin at the foundation. Not with rumors, not with shouts, but with the oath we swore when we took our seats in this chamber." She lifted a single page, not flashy, not even new. It was a copy of the oath of office every member of Congress recited. She read it, each word deliberate, "that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The words rolled like thunder, ordinary on paper, electric in her delivery. "Now," she continued, "tell me, Congresswoman, where in that oath did we promise to slander our colleagues with unverified claims? Where in that oath did we swear allegiance to gossip sites, to internet rumors, to theater instead of truth?" The gallery rustled. Some reporters nodded, others scribbled furiously. Crockett wasn't shouting. She was building a wall of law, brick by brick, leaving Green no opening. Green tried to interrupt, her voice sharp, "Don't twist the oath." But Crockett's voice cut cleanly through, louder without raising in pitch. "I'm not twisting it. I'm reciting it. And if you can't stand to hear your own words, then perhaps you should reconsider whether you still remember the promise you made." A few audible gasps broke from the back row. Crockett let the moment breathe, then pressed on. "You accuse me of hiding. Let me remind you what hiding looks like. Hiding is when you wave around papers that would never pass evidence in a courtroom. Hiding is when you scream so loud you hope no one notices you have nothing in your hands but noise. I do not hide. I cite. I reference. I place my faith in the very law you claim to uphold." Her rhythm was deliberate, slow, certain, designed for every camera to capture without missing a syllable. She turned slightly, her eyes flicking to the committee chair. "Mr. Chairman, I request that the Congressional Record note the oath of office as Exhibit A. Let the public see what binds us, not rumor, not rage, but responsibility." The chair nodded, gavel tapping once. So entered. Green slammed a hand on her table. "This isn't about the oath. This is about her, about Crockett pretending she's clean while taking dark money." The phrase dark money caught ears, head swiveled again. Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as though examining a child's unfinished homework. "Dark money," she repeated calmly. "You want to speak of finances? Then let's use real numbers, real dates, real filings." From her folder, she drew a copy of a Federal Election Commission report, one that listed contributions, line by line, source by source. "My record is clear, transparent, filed for the public, every dollar accounted for. That is how the law works." She paused, then leaned in closer. "But tell me, Congresswoman, when was the last time you explained to your constituents why over $200,000 in PAC contributions flowed into your campaign from a group directly tied to corporate lobbyists? Was that in your oath as well? To defend their interests over theirs?" The chamber stirred again. Green shifted, suddenly less sure of her footing. Crockett's tone stayed measured, surgical. "One oath, one record. That's all it takes to show the difference between us. You shout, I cite. You accuse, I prove." The rhythm landed like a drum beat. Viewers at home tweeted it instantly. "You shout, I cite. You accuse, I prove." And in that rhythm, Crockett had shifted the entire narrative. Green was no longer the attacker. She was exposed as reckless, unmoored, unable to meet the weight of the law with anything more than noise. Crockett rested her papers, hands folded again. "The law is not a weapon to wave in anger. It is a foundation to stand on. And if you cannot stand on it, then you will sink beneath it. That's the difference." The gallery murmured approval. Even some members across the aisle glanced down, unwilling to meet Crockett's eyes because they knew the truth of her words. For a moment, Green was silent. The silence was not her strategy, it was her defeat. But Crockett knew this wasn't over. She had established the ground. The oath, the record, the law. But Green was never one to stay quiet. And indeed, before the chair could move to the next speaker, Green's voice rose again, shriller now, desperate. "This is theater," she yelled. "She's grandstanding. She thinks quoting a line makes her better than the rest of us." And with that, the seeds for part 3 were planted. Green, humiliated by Crockett's calm precision, had only one card left: to double down, to shout louder, to force the confrontation higher. But Crockett had set the stage. The law was now the frame, and every desperate cry that followed would only sound more hollow against it. Green's words rang across the chamber like a cracked bell, loud but uneven. She slammed her hand on the desk again, pages flying loose, her voice breaking into the kind of pitch meant more for a rally than for a hearing. "This is theater, that's all this is. You stand there quoting your little lines like some kind of actress. The American people can see it. They can see you hiding. They can see you lying. And I am going to show them the truth you're afraid of." She yanked up the stack of papers she had been waving from the start, holding them above her head so the cameras would catch every shake. The pages quivered like leaves in a storm. "Right here," she shouted. "Right here is proof. Proof that Jasmine Crockett is tied to radical groups. Proof she's funded by people who hate this country. Proof she's not who she says she is." The words bounced across the chamber, but the pages themselves told another story. Reporters in the gallery leaned forward, squinting, realizing they weren't looking at court filings or government records. They were blog posts, chain emails, half-formatted sheets printed from corners of the internet no judge would ever admit as evidence. Still, Green read furiously. "It says right here, anonymous sources confirm connections between Jasmine Crockett's office and radical foreign money. You hear that? Anonymous sources. Patriots risking their lives to tell the truth. And you sit there smug, acting like none of this matters." The gallery stirred, but not in agreement. Staffers exchanged glances. A correspondent whispered into her recorder. "She's citing blogs again. Nothing official." Crockett didn't move. Her silence was deliberate, heavier than any word she could have thrown back. She sat perfectly still, eyes on Green, her expression calm, as though watching a child scrawl crayon on the walls and call it art. The longer Crockett sat in silence, the more Green's voice grew frantic. "You can't hide behind that silence forever," she screamed. "If you were innocent, you'd answer me. If you had nothing to fear, you'd defend yourself. But you can't, because these patriots found the truth, and you are terrified it's coming out." Finally, Crockett reached forward. The red light of her microphone glowed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words landed crisp, each one a measured step. "Congresswoman, if that were evidence, it would carry a name. If it were proof, it would carry a signature. If it were truth, it would stand in a courtroom. Tell me, do those pages carry any of those things?" A hush swept through the chamber. Green blinked, caught between rage and hesitation. "It carries the voices of patriots who won't be silenced." "No," Crockett said, her voice cutting clean as a blade. "It carries rumor, and rumor is not law." The line rippled through the gallery like an electric charge. Reporters typed it instantly. On social feeds, the phrase was already breaking into quotes. "Rumor is not law." Green's hands trembled as she gripped her papers tighter. Her face reddened further. "Don't you dare dismiss the voices of real Americans. You sit there acting superior, acting like you're untouchable because you can quote a statute. But people are dying in this country, and you—" Crockett's voice cut through again, calm and surgical. "You accuse without proof. You shout without evidence. That does not honor the people you claim to represent. It dishonors them. The law is not theater, Congresswoman. It is foundation. If you cannot stand on it, you will sink beneath it." Gasps moved across the room. Members on both sides of the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Green, for a brief moment, seemed to falter, her lips moving without sound. But she couldn't stop herself. She slapped down another paper, reading aloud so fast her words tangled together. Another site, another Patriot blog tracking money flowing into organizations in Crockett's district. Money disappearing into thin air. You want signatures? You want dates? It's right here. She held the page high as though flimsy paper could bear the weight of accusation. Crockett waited. She let the silence grow again, her eyes steady, her hands still folded. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The desperation spoke for itself. The committee chair finally tapped his gavel. "The committee will come to order. Congresswoman Green, you are instructed to refrain from theatrics." Green spun toward him. "Theatrics? You call this theatrics? This is the truth, and you're just afraid of it." The gavel struck harder. Order. But the spectacle had already burned itself out. The pages fluttered like dying sparks. The words fell flat against Crockett's composure. Then, finally, Crockett leaned in again. Her tone was measured, soft enough to draw the room closer. "Congresswoman, every page you wave proves only one thing, that you have no case. In this chamber, law speaks. Facts speak. Rumor does not." The gallery reacted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled. Cameras caught the contrast. Green shouting, papers rattling, Crockett calm, unshaken. And Crockett pressed further. "But if it's receipts you want, real receipts, not rumor, then I am prepared to deliver." The words shifted the room again. Reporters straightened. Members leaned forward. Viewers at home froze, waiting. The promise of receipts, the word itself, meant something was about to change. Green tried to scoff, though the strain showed in her voice. "Go ahead then. Show us what you've got. Let's see these so-called receipts you brag about." Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curving into a restrained smile. She reached for her folder and placed it gently on the desk. "Very well," she said, her voice quiet but edged with steel. The camera zoomed in, the gallery stilled, and the anticipation thickened into silence. Theatrics had burned away. Rumor had dissolved. The law was about to speak. And that was the moment just before Crockett revealed the first page, when the chamber held its breath, knowing the air itself was about to change. The folder lay flat on the desk, but it seemed to pulse with its own energy. Every camera tightened, every person in the chamber leaned forward. Crockett did not rush. She slid a single sheet free from the folder and placed it on top, her hand resting lightly on the edge as if to remind everyone that control had shifted. This, she began, her tone level, is not gossip, it is not rumor, it is a certified filing from the Federal Election Commission. Her words cut slowly through the silence, each syllable weighted. Unlike the stack of papers we've just been subjected to, this document carries a date, a number, and a signature. She lifted the page, holding it just high enough for the cameras to capture. The print was crisp, the seal unmistakable. Contribution, Political Action Committee. Amount, $47,000. Recipient, the campaign of Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Filing date, March 15th. Verified and entered into the record by the Commission. The room erupted with whispers, pens scratching across paper, phones buzzing as reporters pushed out alerts. Split screens lit up across networks. Greene's face frozen between disbelief and fury. Crockett poised with the receipt in hand. Crockett's eyes never left Greene. "Congresswoman, you demanded receipts. Here is one. Not against me, against you. Now tell the people you represent, whose voices are you serving when you cash these checks?" The question hit harder than the paper itself. Greene shifted in her seat, her mouth opening, then snapping shut. For once, words did not come easily. Crockett pressed on, her voice still even. "The people deserve truth, not theater. They deserve to know why money from a lobby tied directly to corporate interests finds its way into your campaign coffers. They deserve to know whether your outrage today belongs to them or to the donors whose signatures are printed right here." The chair rapped his gavel once for order, but it was drowned out by the buzz in the gallery. The balance had shifted. No one doubted it. Theatrics had been replaced by fact, rumor by record. Greene finally managed to speak, though her voice cracked with strain. That doesn't mean anything. Every politician takes donations. This is politics as usual." Crockett's reply was immediate, precise. "You call it usual. I call it influence. And influence, when hidden behind noise, is corruption. The difference between us, Congresswoman, is that I don't need to scream to cover for mine because there is nothing to cover." The chamber gasped again. The contrast captured in every camera angle. Greene clutching at excuses, Crockett steady as stone. But Crockett wasn't finished. She set the document back down, sliding another sheet halfway from the folder without lifting it. The gesture alone was enough to electrify the room. "One receipt," she said. "That was enough to show the truth of your accusations. But this folder carries more. Every dollar accounted for. Every connection made clear. If you truly want to keep pressing, Congresswoman, then I will keep turning pages." The threat wasn't shouted. It was offered calmly, almost politely. Yet it landed with the force of a hammer. Greene's lips tightened. She tried to sneer, but the expression faltered. She had demanded proof. Crockett had brought it. And the more she pressed now, the more Crockett would reveal. For the first time, the chamber saw Greene hesitate. Crockett leaned back, folding her hands again, leaving the document visible on the desk. "This is what a receipt looks like. Not an anonymous whisper. Not a rumor dressed up in headlines. A record, filed under oath, bearing the signatures of those who fund your campaigns. And I will remind you again, rumor is not law. This island." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of tension, of realization, of the weight of evidence. Reporters sent updates racing across the country. Screens lit up in living rooms and on phones. Hashtags began to trend. Number 1 receipt, number law not rumor. Across the chamber, Greene sat frozen, her papers limp in her hands. The blog post that had once seemed like ammunition now looked like scraps compared to the single page resting in front of Crockett. Crockett allowed herself the faintest nod, as though marking the moment. She had not raised her voice once. She had not traded insult for insult. And yet, with one law and one receipt, she had shifted the ground beneath her opponent. But she knew this was not the end. Greene was loud, and noise has a way of returning even when silenced. And from the corner of the chamber, another voice stirred, a deeper, heavier voice that carried with it the weight of the court itself. It was Samuel Alito. The chamber braced as his microphone clicked alive, his words beginning to form. And in that instant, everyone knew the confrontation had just escalated beyond Greene's outbursts. Theatrics had been answered. Now power itself was stepping in. The red light on Justice Samuel Alito's microphone blinked to life, and the entire chamber seemed to inhale at once. A Supreme Court justice speaking in the middle of a congressional hearing was rare enough. Doing so to defend Marjorie Taylor Greene was unprecedented. Alito's voice carried a tone of authority, not raised but commanding. "This chamber is treading into territory it has no authority over," he said, his words clipped and cold. "Campaign finance is politics. The judiciary is not to be pulled into every partisan spectacle." The room shifted. Some members nodded uneasily, grateful for the cover of his robe. Others frowned, recognizing the overreach. Reporters scribbled furiously. This was no longer Crockett versus Greene. Now, the highest court in the land had stepped onto the battlefield. Crockett did not flinch. She turned slightly in her chair, eyes settling on Alito with the same calm precision she had used on Greene. Her microphone clicked back on. "Justice Alito," she said evenly, "with respect, this is not about pulling the court into politics. This is about truth, and truth does not exempt itself when the stakes are high." Alito's jaw tightened. "Congresswoman, you are overstepping." Crockett leaned forward. Her tone remained surgical. "Overstepping is when a justice accepts lavish gifts and fails to disclose them. Overstepping is when lobbyists find their way to the doorsteps of those entrusted with impartiality. What I am doing, Justice, is oversight. And oversight is not optional, it is our duty." The air thickened. A murmur rippled across the gallery. This was no longer a clash of equals, it was a collision between branches of government, the people's representative confronting the court's authority head-on. Alito narrowed his eyes, adjusting the papers before him, though everyone knew he didn't need them. "You presume too much," he said, his voice lower, more dangerous. But Crockett had already reached for another page. She held it lightly, not even raising her voice. "Presumption is unnecessary when evidence speaks. This, Justice, is a communication from your own chambers, an email between one of your aides and a lobbyist. Dated, logged, and recorded. It does not speak of impartiality. It speaks of influence." The page hovered in her hand, unread in detail, but its very presence sent the gallery into a storm. Reporters reached for their phones, social feeds exploded. A sitting member of Congress holding an internal email tied to a Supreme Court justice was a headline unto itself. Alito shifted, his voice firmer now. "That email is out of context." Crockett interrupted, calm but unyielding. "Context is precisely what hearings provide. You may insist it means nothing, but the American people deserve to see whether their highest court is influenced by private interests. The law demands transparency, and transparency does not end where the robe begins." The line hit hard. Even some members who had sat silently until now stirred, whispering behind their hands. The hearing room was no longer divided along party lines. It was divided between those who believed no one was above questioning and those afraid of what questions might reveal. Greene tried to break the moment, slamming her palm again. "She's attacking the court itself. This is dangerous." Crockett didn't look at her. She kept her eyes locked on Alito. "Dangerous," she said quietly, "is when power hides behind robes and hopes the people are too distracted by shouting to notice. Dangerous is when influence goes unchecked, when money moves unseen, when oaths are treated as theater. The only danger here is silence, and I refuse to be silent." The words echoed in the chamber. 6 seconds of silence followed, the kind of pause that bends time, where every listener feels the weight of history settling. Alito exhaled, leaning back slightly, but he did not answer. Crockett set the page down without reading further. She didn't need to. The implication was enough. She folded her hands again, the picture of composure. One law, one receipt, that was all it took to end rumor. And now, Justice, one email is all it takes to remind this country that robes do not shield accountability. The gallery erupted again, reporters standing now, voices hushed but urgent as they dictated lines that would run across the evening broadcasts. Viewers at home flooded comment sections. Hashtags rose. Number 1 law, 1 receipt. Number no one above questions. For Greene, the effect was suffocating. Her earlier bravado had dissolved into silence. For Alito, the robe that once symbolized untouchable authority now looked more like a veil pulled too thin. And for Crockett, the moment crystallized her role not just a congresswoman defending herself, but a voice channeling the demand of millions. That power must answer. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She let the silence speak. The chair tapped his gavel once more, but his voice trembled slightly as he said, "The committee will proceed." And proceed it would, because Crockett had only begun to open the folder, and everyone knew more was inside. The room braced itself. The clash had expanded from insult to institution, from a shouting match to a test of accountability itself. And as the cameras zoomed tighter, as the audience leaned forward in living rooms across the country, one truth was undeniable. The next page would cut deeper still. The chamber still vibrated with the echo of Crockett's words. The single page she had set down was enough to shift the balance of the entire hearing. Alito had spoken, but his authority had cracked under the weight of her calm precision. Green had shouted herself into silence. And yet the room was not done. The air was heavy with expectation, as though the next words might set the course of history itself. Crockett reached into her folder again, but this time, instead of another receipt, she pulled free a small, worn booklet. The cover was plain, the edges frayed from use. She held it in both hands, and immediately everyone recognized it. "The United States Code," she said softly. Her voice carried without force, each word cutting clean. Title 18, Section 201, Bribery of Public Officials and Witnesses. The chamber froze. Cameras zoomed closer. Every pen in the gallery stilled. Crockett turned the page slowly, her eyes scanning as though to remind herself of the precise weight of the words. Then she read aloud, steady and deliberate. "Whoever directly or indirectly, corruptly gives, offers, or promises anything of value to any public official, with intent to influence any official act, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 15 years. She closed the booklet gently, setting it on the desk beside the receipt she had already displayed. One law. That is all it takes to remind this chamber that influence is not politics as usual. It is a crime. The room murmured, the weight of the statute settling over every seat. Even the chair shifted uncomfortably. Crockett leaned forward. Her eyes moved from Green to Alito, unblinking. This is not my opinion. This is not rumor. This is the law of the United States. And no robe, no title, no microphone changes its meaning. Alito cleared his throat, his voice low. Congresswoman, you are making dangerous insinuations. Crockett did not flinch. Insinuation is when one waves rumors without evidence. What I have just read is the black letter of the law. And every American watching this hearing knows it applies to all of us representatives, justices, every public official who touches power. The silence stretched again, thick and tense. Green shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between Crockett and Alito, as though searching for rescue. But none came. Crockett tapped the law book lightly with her fingertip. One statute, one line. It is enough to pierce the fog of theatrics. It is enough to remind every person here that this hearing is not a stage, not a circus, but a test of accountability. She let her gaze sweep the chamber, pausing long enough for the cameras to catch the determination in her eyes. And I intend to see that test through. The gallery was hushed. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing they had just witnessed another headline moment. Social feeds exploded again. Number one law, number no one above it. Green finally tried to interject, her voice trembling with the effort to regain control. You can't accuse me of bribery? That's insane. You can't just... Crockett raised a hand, not to silence her but to steady the air. I have accused you of nothing, Congresswoman. The law accuses. The record accuses. The receipts accuse. My role is only to place them here, before the American people, and let them decide who honors the oath and who betrays it. The line struck like lightning. Green faltered, her words dissolving into half-formed protests. Crockett leaned back again, folding her hands as she had done so many times before. She did not need to raise her voice. She had already shifted the axis of the room. One law, one receipt, one moment of clarity, and both Green and Alito were cornered without her ever breaking composure. The chair rapped his gavel again, his voice tight. The committee will maintain order. But everyone knew order had already been restored, not by the gavel, but by the law itself. Crockett rested her fingertips on the folded booklet. This is where we stand now. No more shouting, no more rumor. Only the law, and the facts that measure against it. The gallery remained silent, but the silence was alive. Viewers at home could feel the chill through their screens, the sense that something larger than politics had just been spoken into the air. And then, without raising her head, Crockett slid another document halfway from the folder. She did not lift it yet. She only let its corner rest in view, as if to remind the chamber that law was not the only blade she carried. "Receipts remain," she said quietly, "and the people will see them." The murmur in the gallery rose again, anticipation building, the tension coiling tighter. Everyone knew what came next would strike even harder. The chamber waited. The folder waited. The law lay open on the desk, unanswerable. And in that waiting, the stage was set for the next blow, where paper trails of money would speak louder than any denial. The corner of the next page caught the light as Crockett slid it from her folder. She did not lift it high, not yet. The chamber leaned in, caught in the gravity of the moment. Green fidgeted, her fingers drumming the desk, her face a mask of forced defiance. Alito's jaw was set, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Crockett let the suspense hold for a breath before speaking. "This is not speculation. This is not commentary. This is a financial record." She raised the page just enough for the seal to glint under the overhead lights. $75,000. Paid by a corporate donor with a direct interest before the court. The same donor whose case was argued while Justice Alito sat on the bench. "And the date?" She paused, her voice even, surgical. "The payment cleared within 24 hours of that decision." The room erupted in whispers that the gavel could not silence. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras zoomed tighter. The numbers on the page were not abstract, they were a trail, clear and undeniable. Crockett laid the sheet flat on the desk beside the law book and the first receipt. One statute, one receipt, and now another. The pattern is not complicated. It is money flowing where influence should never reach. Green blurted out, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. Donations happen all the time. You're twisting this into some conspiracy." Crockett's eyes cut to her, calm and piercing. "Congresswoman, when the donation is made within a day of a ruling, it is not coincidence, it is coordination. And coordination that benefits the powerful at the expense of the people is not democracy. It is corruption." Gasps rippled again. Louder this time, the word corruption vibrating like a struck chord. Alito leaned forward, his voice tight. "You are drawing dangerous conclusions from timing alone." Crockett shook her head, her tone never rising. "I am not drawing conclusions. I am presenting facts. The timing speaks. The amount speaks. The law I read moments ago speaks. What remains, justice, is whether you believe you are above it." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even Green, who had been quick to shout, sat frozen. The weight of the document on the table seemed to anchor her in place. Crockett folded her hands again, her voice softening but not losing its edge. "The American people deserve more than noise. They deserve more than rumor. They deserve to know that those who decide their fate are not bought, not swayed, not compromised by the weight of a check." The gallery was silent, the kind of silence that amplifies every breath, every shuffle of a shoe. Crockett let the moment breathe, then delivered the line that would run on every broadcast by nightfall. One law, two receipts, and still, no answer. Alito looked down at his papers. Green stared at the desk. Neither spoke. And in that silence, the balance of the room shifted fully. Theatrics had been burned away, authority shaken, influence exposed. Crockett had not raised her voice once. Yet the chamber, and the country beyond it, could feel the strike land. The chair cleared his throat, uncertain, and tapped the gavel. "Proceed." But even his voice trembled with the knowledge that nothing could proceed as it had before. The next page still waited in the folder, and the entire chamber braced, knowing the storm was not yet finished. The $75,000 receipt still lay on the desk, its ink darker than the silence that followed. Every lens fixed on it, every eye drawn to the numbers spelled out in undeniable detail. Green sat stiff, her mouth pressed into a thin line. She had no shout left, no paper to wave. Theatrics had burned away. It was Alito who broke the quiet. His voice was deliberate, clipped, every syllable meant to reclaim the authority that seemed to slip through his fingers. Correlation, he said, is not causation. To suggest otherwise is reckless. To hold up a receipt and imply a justice's decision was swayed is an affront to the independence of this court. The words were heavy, but they landed hollow. The chamber could feel it. Independence had power only if trust remained, and the receipt on the table had already drained it. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her tone calm as ever. Independence, Justice, is not a shield from questions. It is earned in the open, not claimed in the shadows. And when money and rulings appear side by side, questions are not reckless. They are inevitable. She paused, letting the stillness grow. The real affront is silence when the people ask for answers. Gasps again, low but sharp. Reporters scribbled, knowing the quote would lead every broadcast. Alito's eyes narrowed. You tread close to undermining the very system you claim to defend. Crockett shook her head. I tread only where the facts lead. And if those facts undermine trust, then it is not I who have harmed the system. It is those who forgot that their duty is not to donors, not to power, but to the people. The words carried a chill. Green shifted uncomfortably, her shoulders rigid, as if the sentence had landed on her as much as it had on Alito. Crockett let her gaze sweep the chamber, calm but unflinching. This is not theater. This is oversight. And oversight is the spine of democracy. Without it, law collapses into performance, and justice collapses into noise. The silence returned. Longer this time. Deeper. Alito did not answer. Green did not speak. The gavel did not fall. The only sound was the steady hum of cameras capturing the moment. Crockett folded the receipt neatly back into the folder, but the impression it left on the desk seemed burned into the wood. She placed her hand on the cover, her voice softer now, but carrying even more weight. One law, two receipts, still no answer. Perhaps that silence is the loudest evidence of all. The chamber froze on that thought. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed looks. Social feeds lit up instantly. Number, silence speaks. Number, law and receipts. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing what those in the chamber already knew. The confrontation had shifted again. The justice who had stepped in to defend Green now sat in silence, his robe no protection against the calm weight of Crockett's words. And in that silence, Crockett closed the folder without locking it. There is more, she said simply. But even one unanswered truth is enough to change a nation. The line cut through the air, final yet unfinished, like a door cracked open. The room braced itself. The next moment would not just test Green, not just test Alito, but test the very patience of a public watching live, waiting for proof that their voices could reach even here. The folder was closed, but the weight of it remained, like a storm cloud still heavy even after the first strike of thunder. No one moved. The silence that lingered around Justice Alito was almost more powerful than the receipts themselves. His refusal to speak had become its own kind of testimony, and everyone in the room could feel it. Crockett leaned forward again, her microphone alive with its small red glow. She didn't reach for another document yet. Instead, she chose her words with the care of a surgeon. Justice Alito, she said, her voice even, when history looks back on this day, it will not remember the noise. It will not remember the shouting. It will remember the silence. Your silence. And the silence of every official who thought accountability was optional. The gallery rippled with low murmurs. Green fidgeted, looking down at her scattered stack of blogs that now looked like the toys of a child brought to a courtroom. Alito's face remained stone, but the cameras caught the flicker of tension in his jaw. Crockett allowed the silence to stretch again before she slid one last sheet from the folder. Not a thick file, not a stack, but a single page. She placed it flat before her and spoke slowly. This record is brief, but its timing is louder than any speech. A transfer of funds $75,000 documented the very morning before a ruling was handed down. A ruling written with your name attached, Justice. That is not theater. That is fact. The room erupted in murmurs. The chair struck the gavel, but order did not return. Reporters typed with fury. Networks cut live banners across their screens. The line between coincidence and corruption had thinned to the breaking point, and Crockett had laid it bare with one page. She leaned into the microphone, her voice firm but calm. I will ask only one question, and I will not need to repeat it. Justice Alito, Can you tell the American people under oath that this payment had no influence on your ruling? The question hung like a blade. 6 seconds passed, then 10. Alito's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Green glanced toward him, waiting, desperate for him to rescue what remained of her own defense. But nothing came. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Crockett sat back, folding her hands once more. No answer. That is the answer. The gallery gasped. Phones lit up as hashtags spread. Number no answer is the answer, number one law, one receipt. Viewers at home replayed the moment instantly, the freeze frame of a justice unable or unwilling to speak. Crockett did not smile. She did not gloat. Her voice remained steady, almost mournful. This is the state of our democracy. Representatives who shout louder than their evidence, and justices who sit quieter than their duty. And yet the people are watching. They are listening. They are not fooled. The chair tapped the gavel again, his voice strained. The committee will come to order. But the chamber knew order had already been reshaped by silence, by the refusal of power to defend itself against proof. Crockett closed the folder with a quiet finality, her hands resting on it as though sealing the record. One law, two receipts, one unanswered question. That is enough for the people to decide what justice looks like. The gallery buzzed again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was recognition. Something irreversible had just occurred, not a ruling, not a verdict, but a fracture of trust that would echo long after the hearing adjourned. And in that fracture, Crockett's voice carried the weight of every viewer leaning forward on their screens. Every citizen who had ever wondered if truth could still rise in a chamber built to contain it. The silence had already said more than words could. But outside the chamber, the echo multiplied. On television screens across the country, anchors cut in with breaking banners, replaying the freeze frame of Alito's unmoving lips. On phones, clips shot through social feeds, looping the moment Crockett asked the question and the moment he failed to answer. Within minutes, hashtags were climbing. Number no answer is the answer, number one law, one receipt, number silence speaks. Inside the room, the tension shifted from confrontation to reckoning. Members who had stayed silent leaned back in their chairs, some avoiding the cameras, others whispering in low, uneasy tones. The gallery buzzed like a hive. Reporters spoke over one another as they dictated lines to editors. The gavel struck, but order was no longer the chair's to give. Crockett sat steady, her folder closed, her hands folded. She didn't need to say more. The room, the cameras, the country were doing the work for her. Every eye returned again and again to the empty space between Alito's microphone and his silence. Green tried once more, her voice thinner now, stripped of its earlier fire. This is all just politics, just a circus. But even she seemed to know, the words rang hollow. No one in the gallery leaned forward. No one in the chamber reacted. Her voice fell flat against the weight of what had already passed. Crockett finally spoke, not to Green, not even to Alito, but to the record itself. Let history note what was asked. Let history note what was answered. And let history note what was not. The words settled like a verdict. The people watching at home felt it as if it were addressed to them personally. The moment was no longer about one congresswoman facing insults, or even one justice avoiding a question. It was about a country seeing, in real time, who stood on law and who sank into silence. And still, Crockett did not gloat. She let the room breathe, let the silence deepen into something unforgettable. Then she added the line that would become a rallying cry. If one law and two receipts can silence power, then imagine what truth in full view could do. The chamber stirred again, not with noise but with recognition. Reporters scribbled it instantly, knowing they had their headline. Viewers tweeted it in real time, pushing it into trending lists within minutes. The phrase crossed from the hearing room into households, cafes, offices everywhere. Americans were asking themselves what accountability truly meant. The chair tried again with the gavel, his voice faint. Order, but there was no order left to restore. The story had already escaped the room, carried by every camera and every voice that replayed the silence louder than any denial. Crockett sat back once more, composed, her eyes calm. She had not raised her voice. She had not traded insult for insult. She had relied on law, on receipts, and on the undeniable weight of silence. And with that, The hearing had become something larger than itself, a reckoning not just for Green, not just for Alito, but for the very idea of accountability. And beyond the chamber doors, America was waiting, watching, ready to ask the same question Crockett had asked, and demand an answer no robe or title could withhold. The hearing adjourned, but no one in America believed it was truly over. The gavel had fallen, the microphones had gone silent, yet the image lingered, the sight of Green slumped in her chair, her stack of rumors useless, and Justice Alito staring at the desk with words unsaid. That silence was replayed more than any speech, more than any insult. It was the moment power failed to answer. Outside the chamber, reporters flooded the steps, their voices echoing against marble columns as they explained to the country what had just unfolded. Networks ran split screens of Crockett reading the law, of the receipts stamped and dated, of Alito pausing too long when one simple denial could have cleared the air. But he hadn't, and that absence spoke louder than denial ever could. Across living rooms, kitchens, and phones, people replayed it. Some cheered, some sat stunned. But nearly everyone felt the same realization rising. If noise and rumor can collapse under the weight of law, then maybe the system still had a pulse. Maybe truth could still cut through. Crockett walked out of the chamber without a smile, without a victory pose. She had not come to win a performance. She had come to show a principle, that law is stronger than shouting, and that silence in the face of proof is its own confession. The cameras followed her, but her pace remained steady, her face calm. The work, she seemed to say, was not in the moment, it was in the meaning. And meaning was what spread across the nation. Hashtags trended for 48 hours. Number 1 law 1 receipt, number silence speaks, number no answer is the answer. Comment sections filled not just with celebration, but with reflection. Citizens asked, if one question could freeze a justice, what else must be asked? If one law and one receipt could corner power, what else is waiting to be uncovered? That was the true impact, not that Green was silenced, not that Alito looked cornered, but that millions of Americans began to see questioning itself as power. The right to ask, the duty to hold accountable, the courage to say, show us the law, show us the receipts. No one is above them. For older generations watching on television, it recalled the hearings of decades past when corruption was first dragged into daylight. For younger viewers on social platforms, it became proof that noise could be beaten by calm, that spectacle could be dismantled by patience. For all, it was a reminder that democracy is not built on shouting the loudest, it is built on answering the hardest questions. Crockett herself summarized it best in the line already circling every feed. 1 law, 2 receipts, still no answer. Perhaps silence is the loudest evidence of all. It wasn't a slogan, it was a verdict. A verdict delivered not by gavel, but by the American people who now carried the question forward. And here lies the message this story leaves us with, that justice does not need anger to be real. It does not need volume to be heard. It needs only truth, spoken plainly, placed on the record, and allowed to stand. The law does not tremble when faced with noise, it trembles when silence meets evidence. That is when the mask slips, when the robe cannot shield, when the people see what power truly island. If this moment proved anything, it is that the fight for accountability is not Crockett's alone. It belongs to every citizen willing to demand answers, to every viewer willing to ask, why was the question left unanswered? That is the core of democracy, not blind loyalty, not empty shouting, but the courage to ask and to insist on answers. So let history note what happened in that room. Let it note the law read aloud. Let it note the receipts placed in plain view. Let it note the silence that followed. And let it note that the people watching, from every state and every screen, did not turn away. They leaned in, they shared, they asked again. Because in the end, this story was never about one insult hurled or one justice cornered. It was about something deeper, whether the people's voice still matters. And tonight, it proved that it does. 1 law, 2 receipts, 1 unanswered question. That is enough to remind America that truth still holds the final word.